All right, guys. So we are going to talk about atmospheric air pollutants, natural sources of atmospheric air pollutants, which is topic 7.4. So by the end of this, you need to be able to describe a natural source of carbon dioxide and particulates. So when we look at natural sources of air pollutants, we've talked about this before a long time ago when we talked about the nitrogen cycle, that lightning strikes actually convert um, nitrogen gas in the atmosphere to NOx. And so that could be NO2, which is considered an air pollutant. Forest fires are also a large natural source of air pollutants. When you combust biomass of any kind, you're releasing carbon dioxide. You can also be releasing carbon monoxide. It's the burning of these trees releases water vapor into the atmosphere. And remember that water vapor um, is considered a greenhouse gas. It's not one that we look towards regulating or are particularly concerned about, but it is considered a greenhouse gas. And then also with the combustion, we have the release of NOx as well. Plants, especially conifer trees, so cone-bearing trees or evergreen trees, are sources of VOCs, volatile organic compounds. And so this really strong pine smell that you might get from pine trees, or just the smell from spruce trees, think Christmas tree smell, those are what we call terpenes, and those are considered VOCs. And so when you put these VOCs into the atmosphere, remember that VOCs are a contributor to photochemical smog. And so if you think about, or if you've ever been to the Smoky Mountains, that smokiness in the Smoky Mountains is actually photochemical smog, and particularly in large amounts in that area because of all of the evergreen trees in those mountains. And then volcanoes are another source of natural source of air pollutants. So sulfur dioxide is given off during volcanic eruptions, particulate matters, carbon monoxide, and then our NOx as well. So then if we look at sources, natural sources of carbon dioxide, you need to remember that all living things perform respiration. So plants included are respirating. They are also performing photosynthesis, but respiration as well. And anytime that a living organism is performing respiration, they're giving off carbon dioxide. One of the things to remember, though, when we're talking about sources of carbon dioxide, respiration is not a significant source of carbon dioxide. Source, yes, um, but not something to particularly dwell on in a free response question. So some natural sources of particulate matter would be around here from the sea spray. So the salt in the ocean, in the sea spray, pollen. If you've ever looked around in the springtime when it starts to become windy and we can see all kinds of yellow pollen everywhere. Ash from forest fires is considered particulate matter. And then just dust when farmers are plowing their fields, or just dust from dirt roads or bare ground is considered particulate matter. And so a lot of these natural sources of particulate matter will lead to something that we call haze. And so haze is kind of this idea, you've heard that term before, oh, it looks hazy, there's kind of a reduction in visibility. It's important to note that haze is very different from photochemical smog. This particulate matter is not causing smog, but rather what we consider haze, or the scattering of sunlight. Another natural source of carbon dioxide would be aerobic decomposition. So anytime that things are being decomposed, especially by bacteria, when there's plenty of oxygen in the environment, those decomposers are going to give off carbon dioxide. When there's not as much oxygen, or there's a lack of oxygen in an environment, decomposition still happens, but it's often like, think about like mucky mud, kind of wetland areas where there's not as much oxygen or an oxygen deprived environment. Then that decomposition happens under anaerobic conditions, so no oxygen present. And instead of releasing carbon dioxide, we release methane, which again is a greenhouse gas. So let's focus particularly on particulate matter. So particulate matter is solid particles, but it can be also liquid particles that are suspended in the air. And so we refer to these as particulates. And we have two classes of particulates. We consider PM10, and these are particles or droplets, dust, ash, mold, pollen are natural sources of particulate matter. And they're small enough that they're not going to be filtered out by the hairs in your nose or by the cilia in your trachea. And so they're going to get down into your lungs, and they can cause inflammation. And so, kind of for reference, a human hair, a single human hair, is like 50 to 70 microns. And when we're talking about PM10, we're talking about any particles that are less than 10 microns, so significantly smaller than the diameter of a human hair. And then even smaller still are particulates that we can call PM 2.5. And so these are particulates that are under 2.5 micrometers. And so these could be particulates that are coming from combustion. They could be really small dust particles, fine dust particles. And the big problem here is that because they are so small, they can travel deep into your lungs and can embed in the lining of your lungs or in the wall of your lungs. And these are the particulates that are really associated with things like chronic bronchitis or increased rates of lung cancer and things like that. So the practice FRQ that I'd like you to do is an experimental design. So you're going to conduct, or you need to pretend like you're going to conduct an experiment to determine how road construction impacts the amount of particulate matter in the air. And you're going to spread Vaseline onto the bottom of 6 Petri dishes and then place them at various distances from a road construction site and an existing road. So the first 3 dishes are going to be placed at 50, 100, and 200 yards from the road construction site. And then the second group of dishes are going to be placed at the same distances, 50, 100, and 200 yards from an active road, but one that's not under construction. And so I would like you to identify the control group that is used in this experiment, and then the likely dependent variable the students are measuring, and then you want to describe how they could measure this variable. So how are they going to get any data from this type of experiment? All right, guys, let's shut this down.